Yeah, really excited to be here. Everyone's been giving really exciting talks yesterday, today. This is the last panel of Funding the Commons, so I'm really excited to try to tie it all together in a more philosophical way. So to start off, I think a lot of people here might already know you guys, but let's just in case people don't, why don't we give a 1 minute introduction of who you guys are, what do you guys do? Would you start?
Cool, yeah. Hey everyone, my name is Eleftherios. I'm originally from Greece, but I'm based in Berlin, Germany. I previously founded the Radical project, which is a decentralized code collaboration network, and the DRIPS project, which is a tooling for funding your critical software dependencies.
I'm Julian Zawistowski, mostly based in Warsaw, Poland. I'm leading Golem Foundation, which is a spin-off of Golem project, which was one of the very first project to be crowdfunded on Ethereum through the token sale. Yes, and our main project is Octant at the moment, with the focus on public goods funding and the GLM use case.
All right, David Casey here, Director of Funding the Commons, based in the San Francisco Bay Area and globally. And we do these conferences around the world, as well as hackathons and builder residencies for developers of open source public goods. And we are really focused on bringing together the builders, researchers, academics, protocols that are unified around the desire to more effectively fund public goods and experiment and innovate on how to do so better. Thank you.
Yeah. So my name is Jacky. I'm organizer of Butzdao, and we're also having our conference next, starting tomorrow, Taipei Blockchain next door. So to talk about public goods, I think really comes down to how do we measure impact? How do we fund things that are impactful? And what is the right way to fund impact and the right source of funding for impact? So these are the high-level points we're going to touch about today. And I'd like to start off the first question about what is the best way to measure, quantify impact? Would you like to start?
Yeah, I mean it's a really broad question. I think my short answer on this, it very much depends on who you are, your value system, the community you're part of. The answer is very different, if you are a government, and I know that we had some participants from the government here, or if you are an extremely well-funded DAO, or you're a traditional corporation. So it depends, it depends on what is it that you want to see in the world. I think the main point that I want to communicate here is that the question is important, right? So the question is important, and it is important for your community to actually try to engage in the question. But I feel that the answers will be very much depending on what you're really trying to accomplish and what kind of world you envision. So maybe we can go deeper if someone wants to go deeper. But
yeah, I may. So this is in a way like a political question, because when you're measuring impact, of course, it's to inform you whether it was worth funding that, whether the funding should continue. And this is never a binary decision, in a way that there is always an opportunity cost. So if you fund something, you do not fund something else. At least if this is like a limited resources allocation problem. And because of that, at the end of the day, you need to measure things just to inform the public. But at the end of the day, you need a good mechanism for the public to take the decision based on exactly their value systems, what they think is important, what they think is not important. I hope that builds well on what you said.
yeah, totally.
Yeah,
David?
so echoing what both of you said, the values are important. What are we valuing? And I think it's important to be explicit about that and state the values. The community for whom the impact is being measured is important. So we use this word public goods very broadly, but generally there is a specific public, whether it's the crypto community, the population of Taiwan, the population of the planet Earth. These are all kind of different publics. So for whom is the impact being measured, and who is doing the measuring? Is the measurer or the evaluator trusted by the community that the impact is intended for? Is it community-driven measurement? or is it more like a top-down measurement? So I think these are all interesting questions to look at when designing an impact evaluation system.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of new.
Yeah, if I can add one more thought here is that I think taking a more practical perspective of where as a space we are with regards to public goods funding, I would say that the main impact that we're collectively having is the fact that we engineering a culture of valuing public goods. Like if you really think about what has happened in the space since since funding public goods started to become a movement, I think that look at some of the biggest success stories like Gitcoin or RetroPGF. Still, it's very hard for some of those projects to actually talk about impact. But we all collectively can see that, well, like they have sparked the interest around funding public goods. They have made that part of the agenda, right? So I think, continuing to push this idea of like, let's, move away from the degenerate and, selfish nature of the crypto space, and let's create something that actually values public good is I think a lot more valuable at the moment, rather than trying to actually get extremely precise on like, this is the precise impact that, my allocation had on Gitcoin round one. I don't try to discredit that, and I think that we're getting to the place now that actually being able to measure the impact that each of those different mechanisms and each of these different communities are having is very, very important. But I think it's important that we recognize where we are in that journey.
It sounds like how we measure impact for public goods is something that's really contextual and subjective to where you're from or what you're building and who are people who are verifying the impact. And you mentioned a lot of different mechanisms of kind of providing public goods, including like quadratic funding, quadratic voting, retro PGF. When you go about designing a way to fund public goods, what mechanism do you choose, and what's the philosophy behind each of those decisions? Maybe David, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think we have a couple people on stage innovating in design of public goods funding systems. For me, again, it's like, what is the community that we are directing the public goods funding towards? What is the value system of that community? How can we make the community participate to the optimum or maximum capacity in the process of designing the system and having input and again controlling the evaluation and measurement. Yeah, those are some thoughts. I want to give the stage to you too.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is like the obvious for us here on the stage, but that may be not obvious for the whole audience. That I will try to connect some of the dots that were like mentioned in the speeches before. So one of them was what Dobrusha said, that this like a space like is like a flooded with money, in a way. So like money is not an issue. So what is an issue? An issue is like how we take decisions, how we exactly decide what is important, what is not important. And I think that the fact that we are witnessing this like a growing regenerative like a momentum for this space is not only because like as decentralized blockchain Web3 space, we need some healing factor after all the bads that happened over the past few years, and we are kind of like looking for the goal, for the purpose of what we are doing, and that niche like fits nicely. But I think the second problem is that we can more and more see that like a legacy mechanism we have for the resources allocation, so basically like through the governments, are less and less efficient. They are not really suitable to the problems we face as the modern world. And then coming to the methods, like this is like whether this is like a quadratic funding or quadratic voting or like any other like a fashionable method. At the end of the day, this is like just a tool. But this is like a tool which also like becomes part of the answer, because I think that we as the space have this like a strong tendency to go towards like a mechanism designs, even if they are not about like exploiting people greed, but just like incentivize like what matters. And I think like ultimately that's like part of the bigger solution of the whole system you want to build for this particular problem.
Yeah, and I want to add something interesting that we as an industry have an opportunity for, which is designing and experimenting and innovating with public goods funding systems that can be exported beyond Web3 into the kind of real world and give crypto the purpose that it's been looking for many years.
Yet to add my perspective on the question, I would like to first echo the point that the previous presenter from Octan made that we tend to over-index on mechanisms, like the space really has a thing for mechanisms. But if you actually look at the mechanisms, they have their holes, right? And maybe something else is happening behind the scenes. So what I mean by that is that, when I first look at Gitcoin, I was, as a person that engaged in mechanism design, I was actually skeptical because of the identity component, right? How can you do this in a decentralized setting? But in fact, Gitcoin has been extremely successful, in my opinion, not because, people understand quadratic funding. I actually have done a lot of guerrilla research, and if you go speak to someone and you try to explain to them what quadratic funding means, people don't grasp the math. They struggle with the math, in fact. But what Gitcoin really nailed was that it managed to actually make, bringing a community together to decide about public goods, independent of the mechanism. And I think this is extremely powerful. And I would like to share a story from, my own journey. When we started the Radical project, in one of the first sessions we had, we were talking with the team about the fact that, hey, we want to make this a DAO. We want to make this be a thing where, decision-making actually, is not centralized on a few individuals. And at the time we had around, 15 people in the room, and I asked them, how many of you have actually participated in some form of decentralized decision-making organization? And there was not a single hand, not including mine, right? So what I'm trying to say with that is that I think this idea of having communities get together to decide which public goods to fund, I think this is even more powerful than the mechanisms. I think, and now going to RetroPGF, same story with RetroPGF is actually fantastic. It's a definition thing. If you really look at how does the voting happen, I'm sure that not a single person in the room knows how are the badge holders selected. Can one of you answer? Probably you don't know that, right? So you see that as a mechanism design, we're still patching, and that's absolutely okay. But I think the main contribution that RetroPGF is bringing to the group is that, oh, well, look, we actually using all of those things. These things having an impact. Can we retroactively go fund them? So what I'm trying to say is that mechanisms are great, and there are a lot of great ones. We actually, have developed something that we call dependency funding, which we're doing with DRIPS, which tries to value what you're doing now, not prospective or retrospective. We think it's exciting, but all in all, I think culture is the thing that matters the most. Can we create a culture of giving, and can we make that part of daily operations and enable more people to experience that?
Culture, values, and bring in a community to make decisions together. We mentioned a lot about Gitcoin as a really successful example. So let's talk about the funding sources. What type of sources of funding do you guys find acceptable? There's a famous case recently about Shell's collaboration with Gitcoin to accelerate climate solutions, and some people criticize it as greenwashing. What are you guys' take on that situation? Is any funding source okay, or what are the how do you judge if a funding source is okay or not okay?
Yeah, I have some pretty strong opinions on this one. So for those who are less aware of the history of Shell, you can look up Ken Saro-Wiwa, a Nigerian environmental activist and filmmaker who was basically hanged, assassinated, executed in 1995. The Shell Corporation was brought to court and settled out of court, paid $15 million to his family. He was basically covering and documenting the pollution and contamination in his indigenous homeland of Nigeria. And so for me, the reputation cost of associating with these kinds of entities is extremely dangerous, in my opinion, for a brand like Gitcoin, which has built such a positive reputation over so many years. I think there are ways to take donations and funding without strongly associating with a brand. I don't know if Shell in particular if there is a way to do it with a corporation like Shell. I think there's a spectrum of corporations that have varying degrees of crimes that they've committed in the past, and not to say that they can't atone for their sins, but from the perspective of a public goods funding protocol like Gitcoin, I think that the kind of risk to reputation is pretty extreme in that case in particular.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think David, like I agree with what David said. It very much again depends on the values of that community, right? Like I like the way I experienced that. I saw the backlash on Twitter, which shows that there was some disconnect, between the action of partnering with like Shell and what that community values or the way this partnership was either designed or communicated. Beyond that is a subjective call. Like a part of me says, well, capital going towards funding and sustaining and maintaining public goods, that's good. That's a good thing, and I personally, wouldn't I would be supportive of that, but under the conditions that David said. It's a really subtle line. Anyone that has dealt with a decision like that will know that it's a really elegant play navigating, those different incentives.
Anything to add for Julian?
Yeah. I can add to that to me, regardless of what Shell is and what they did in the past, you could say about any cooperation with any corporation, any cooperation with a corporation, that it feels a little bit like in the earlier days of the blockchain movement, when we had a huge announcement, this or that big company starts using the blockchain technology for this or that. And usually that was just useless shilling, and at the end of the day, it turned out that was some kind of a custom-made proof of authority blockchain, which was a nonsense in any possible way. But on the other hand, you could say that this is something that helps mainstream things, build awareness and so on. So that could seem like being not non-obvious. But I think that at the end of the day, if you want to really change things, advance the change, well, you should not sleep with your enemy, probably. And I think that in that case, that would be the case exactly. And on top of that, I would also think that I also think that what is really important is to build things that are a long-term sustainable, and and of course I'm comfortable saying that now, being Octant, but getting donations is not a long-term sustainable. So you cannot surf on that wave forever. That's my feeling, at least.
Yeah, I guess it's really tough to where do you draw the line on what's acceptable? We talk a lot about corporations, about greed, about capitalism. Where do you draw the line, right? Because we all want public goods to get more funding, to get more attention. And we live in such a attention economy today where, should we play the intention game, right? Should we financialize impact? Or if we don't, what are the alternatives? You guys have any thoughts on, I guess, in terms from a capitalistic point of view, what can be applied to public goods, what shouldn't, where do we draw the line, and what are some alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, I will share two thoughts. I think the one, I will share two clear, no-goes. So the one concern I always had about engaging with the space is this overall trend of hyper-financialization, right? And I think, again, the previous speaker from Octan covered that quite a lot. This space tends to overvalue in financial incentives, right? Let's add the financial incentive where actually one is not needed, right? And this is, I've seen this multiple times going really wrong, and I'm again concerned about the culture that this creates, right? You come in and you introduce a financial incentive where one is not needed, and then you effectively distort something that was actually healthy, and now that's not healthy, right? So that's one clear thing that, at least on my own personal, map, I always try to look at that and say, hey, are what we're doing introducing more of that, right? And it's not, again, an easy answer, like operating in the space, with incentives. It's a hard one. But that's one that I personally always try to keep an eye on and ask that question to myself, like, am I contributing more to this hyper-financialized society with the work I do, yes or no? And then the other one is basically, like, I think this whole idea of humane technologies. The previous speaker just touched a little bit on that. But again, many of us coming from the Web 2 world, we have either engineered or consumed systems that try to, like distract you from something, try to lock you in, like mindset and focus-wise into something. And unfortunately, like multiple times I have experienced the same thing myself with tokens. Like, I don't know how many of the participants here, like, there's a token and then you just like, checking the price, right? Like, and you keep checking the price, right? So there is something, there's something there to be really, that is extremely dangerous when you're combining financial incentives and this attention economy. This is an atomic bomb of sorts. So I would say these are the two things that I'm trying to keep an eye on: hyper-financialization, and then, like, is this thing that I'm engineering enabling the fulfillment of that user, or is trying to lock that user in a system that is actually very far away from themselves and what they try to accomplish in the world?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and say, echoing LA, the danger of like poisoning intrinsic motivations through introducing an external kind of financial incentive. I think there's exceptions, but it is something that has been documented and we heard about earlier this afternoon. The second thing that I wanted to say is that specifically in Web3, protocols that are generating revenue and are relying on open source libraries, and this is a lot of what Drips is doing, I believe should think about how to fund their dependencies, how to give back to the ecosystem. And I think that Optimism is doing it's one way of doing it. It's introducing a protocol fee or a sequencer fee that's a transaction fee basically that is taken from every transaction and put into public goods. Celo is doing this as well, and other protocols. And this is kind of just replicating a tax system from the public sector, from governments. It is a system that has worked through the centuries, and I think there are basic lessons that we can learn from the real world in public goods funding and integrate into crypto, and we don't always have to invent new mechanisms.
So one of the definitions of the public goods is that those are goods that cannot be delivered by the market in an efficient way. So you cannot really put that to market forces. Of course, you can think about how to incentivize people with the monetary means. I don't think that would be efficient at the end of the day. On the other hand, we are working with what we have at hand. And basically, this community is historically driven by greed, and I don't think that this is that comes as a surprise to anyone here. And then I would say that what we try to do, we try to patch it here and there, and build things that could bring a transformation. So at the end of the day, I don't think that the financial incentives are not only they are not a solution, they are not even possible. But on the other hand, you could look at, for example, at what we do with Octant as one providing some kind of a UBI for a certain group of community that has some token, and then providing a way to self-taxate in a reasonable way, with also the overall a taxation mechanism that ensures a huge pile of tokens to do things. And I think for example in Optimism, I think this could be seen as a similar thing, because there is just a tax. And one of the reasons we are sitting here and having all those interesting discussions is because Ethereum has not implemented tax on top of the rewards that are in Ethereum. So we have to go and figure that ourselves how to do that. So I hope that's somehow related to your question.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really interesting. We say corporate capitalism, the greed has historically been what works to motivate people, but you also bring up a good point, Ellie, about you don't want to ruin the intrinsic motivation of people to want to do good things, do public goods. How do you kind of judge when a certain mechanism kind of could pollute the intrinsic motivation versus the external? I think that's really, because sometimes when people volunteer their own time to do something they're passionate about, they love it, right? But as soon as you start paying them, or as soon as it becomes financial, monetary incentivization, it kind of changes the whole dynamics, it changes the culture, it changes how humans behave. How do you kind of safeguard against that?
Go ahead, David, please.
Okay, yeah, I have an interesting example from the book Freakonomics. And basically, it is a school where parents pick up their children and they are coming late and picking up their children late. And there are basically teachers that have to stay after school for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour to receive the parents. And so the school wants to ameliorate this problem, and they try a financial solution, which is to fine the parents, to charge them money to have the pay for the teacher's extra hours. Seems logical. So what ends up happening is the opposite of the intended consequences. All the parents lose their social shame of being late because now they can just pay, and they end up coming 2 hours late instead of 30, 45 minutes.
Yeah, and I think there are numerous examples like that. This is a great one. And I think the answer to your question is you study the past and, you study what has happened, because we have had already many waves of, funding public goods or crowdfunding. And then you ask the question that the previous speaker asked, why do people give, right? Why do people give public goods? Many times, the answer is because they want to be part of the world that this person is creating. They want to belong, I think simply by, asking the question to yourself of okay, I want to engineer a mechanism, or I want to create that world where people are giving more public goods, right? Sometimes the answer is that, okay, my community will need a new ritual. Like I mentioned before, I think Gitcoin at first was more of a ritual, right? That Vitalik really was trying to bring to Ethereum. And because it's Vitalik, a lot of people were hey, this is interesting here. Doesn't matter that it doesn't, do identity stuff perfectly well, right? So yeah, it very much depends, but I think studying the past and asking the question of okay, what am I really trying to create, and what motivates a person to have the behavior that I want, then usually will lead you to avoid some of the issues with financialization and introducing financial incentives where there's no need for them.
Yeah, I think that people can be motivated by non-monetary incentives, absolutely. So, and have nothing to add.
I think maybe the last question here is maybe on a more personal level, what kind of brought you into public goods, and how does that, what motivates you internally, intrinsically, to dedicate yourself to public goods?
Yeah, on my side, what brought me to the Web3 space, maybe in general, that will lead into my story on public goods. But I previously used to work for SoundCloud. I'm a musician myself, a hobbyist, nothing professional. And I joined SoundCloud. I was an early employee there, stayed with them for many years. But the reason why I joined SoundCloud was because back in 2009, 2010, Web2 was the one that was making the promise of disintermediation. So, these Web2 companies at the time were making the promise that we will now decentralize effectively from these really extractive rent seekers of the music industry. And I joined SoundCloud, and I saw the whole transition of SoundCloud, going from nothing into something that I think at some point we had 200 million users using it every month, right? And I realized at some point that this isn't it. These new people are the new gatekeepers, and the promise is lost. And then I started looking into crypto networks as a new way of enabling this form of disintermediation. And that's how I found myself in the Web3 community, because I got really excited about this idea of user-owned and operated network, or community-owned and operated networks. And then in the Web3 space, it was basically this grid that you talked about. The grid can be a motivator for some things, but also can be a motivator for other things. So I saw this, tendency for this extreme selfishness, and I was like, hey, this is really off. I hope that some people actually will use those technologies that enable transparency, that enable communal ownership for something different. And luckily, I found myself in this community. But the story is that if this wasn't a community, I don't know if we will be here talking about public goods and working on things, right? So I think the movement and the fact that there is a movement is extremely important.
Love it. I don't know if Julian and David, you guys want to share your personal story, how you got into public goods?
Well, that would be quite long, but just to try to summarize. So before I started working in the Web3 space, which was back then not called like a Web3 yet, I'm an economist by trade, and I also work mostly with the public sector economics. And even then, I believe our governance mechanisms and our allocation mechanism are somehow broken. And even in the very, very early days of Ethereum, I saw this promise of using that system for governance, which I haven't worked for quite a long time, being in Ethereum. And at the moment, we are able to connect many dots and also attack that problem with what we do, and I'm really happy about that.
Awesome.
I see that as I don't have an ambition that we will challenge all the problems and solve all the problems of the world there, but at least we will be creating a sandbox and helping other playing in that sandbox to find useful stuff.
Love it. David, yeah.
All right, so yeah, I would say my journey started with the discovery of some economists that were writing about the integration of the biosphere, the physical reality around us, into economic systems. One, Herman Daly, The Steady State, and E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, are two really interesting economists that really reframed how to understand value for me. Then, let's see, I think that got me on a journey of what is valuable for human beings and other species here, and how does money relate to that, and how does money capture and embody the values that we share. And for the first time with crypto, I think communities have the opportunity to design value systems. The way I think of crypto is social or behavioral engineering at scale, which is a dangerously powerful tool that can be used for good or for other purposes. I started experimenting with token economies around 2015. This was before the Ethereum mainnet was live, so we were using Colored Coins protocol on Bitcoin. And the experiment was how to create community-issued debt, mutual credit, backed by goods and services that could be traded directly amongst communities and individuals. And that really opened my mind to how can we empower communities to embed their values into economic and monetary systems. And since then, my journey's taken me on a lot of places, but I would say climate and nature and the relationship between the biosphere, air, water, food, these basic resources and value is really, if you think about what is, how valuable is water to humans, and how valuable is it if you're in the desert without water, and or air. How valuable is air if you don't have it? So like these kind of value is relative based on what access you have to it. And I think our current system of money and finance does not really take into account a lot of these kind of basic things of like what is valuable for human beings to survive and thrive on this planet.
Yeah, I think personally I find people who are motivated by public goods some of the best people, best community in the world with a good heart and just wholesome people in general. So thank you all for sharing your personal stories, why you're motivated to do public goods, and some of the philosophies behind all the things we talked about today around public goods. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.